First up today, our newsmaker is Aaron Patrick from the Financial Review. Great to catch up with you, Aaron. The Reserve's hiked the interest rates to 3.85, up from 3.6. All the banks except the Commonwealth Bank said they'd hold. Were you yourself surprised?
I wasn't that surprised, Steve, because it just seemed to me that things were getting a bit out of control. Even inflation was coming down and was way above what the RBA wants. And one of the most interesting things is that house prices have been going up in Sydney. And I think that's a really strong leading indicator, and that's one of the reasons they decided to hike again.
Has the Fin, and I know you have, gone back and looked at, Aaron, just how many people who were on fixed rates are now starting to come out, and how much of a cliff they're now going to have to fall over when it comes to this last rate? I think we're at the highest cash rate now for 10 years.
I think so. I don't have the exact number of how many people are coming off the cliff, but it's considerable because a lot of people went onto it during COVID. And what you're seeing now is people frantically refinancing their mortgages. So there's actually this huge competition for borrowers going on, and banks are throwing money at lenders, and people are churning desperately to try and get low interest rates. And that's just going to accelerate as a result of today's decision.
And we've got a budget, of course, Aaron, next Tuesday. And, you know, there's going to be bad news in that budget, I would think. We've already heard today from Mark Butler that they're going to raise the tax levels on cigarettes by 5%. So people are going to really get whacked in the next couple of weeks, aren't they?
Well, I think people are getting hit by a combination of problems. Inflation is going up and it's not under control. Interest rates are going up, and so people are paying more for their mortgages. And now people are going to get slugged by the budget. So you've got this triple whammy, and it's all designed to basically push people out of work. It's designed to stop people spending, and so the unemployment rate goes up. That's the objective.
Do you think that the rate rise in the US in the last week or so has spooked the Reserve into doing what they did today? Do you think there was any chance, like most commentators said, that they might have held on, but they got spooked by the inflation rate here and what the American Reserve did?
They look very closely at what's going on in America. And if the Americans can't get inflation under control, that will worry the Reserve Bank here. There's also a problem that if the interest rates get too far out of whack between the US and Australia, you can have these huge currency swings, which can have a big impact on trade and our sales overseas. But I think essentially Phil Lowe, the governor, didn't want to look soft on inflation.
Just on other news, I mentioned Mark Butler, the health minister. He addressed the National Press Club today, and he's decided that the government's going to crack down on teenage usage of vapes. Here's what Mark Butler had to say at the Press Club today.
Our focus is not on the people buying, our focus is on the people selling. Yeah, this has been a vendor-driven, corporate-driven phenomenon that we've seen. And so when we talk about enforcement, the state and territory governments and us, we're focused very much on importers and vendors.
Aaron, I don't know about you, but I think he's very optimistic. I mean, how do you put that genie back in the bottle?
Well, it's easy for Mark Butler to say he's focused on vendors, but if he introduces laws making vaping illegal, then who's going to get in trouble? It's going to be teenagers and young people, because they like vaping, you know, and I know it's not great, but they will do it even if the government bans it. And the danger is you sort of got a bunch of young people who may be criminalised, get criminal records for essentially having a smoke behind the shed at school, and that's not great.
It's not, and I just think it's almost impossible to stop. I mean, you know, we can't stop the illicit drug trade. How the hell do we think we're going to stop the black market importation of vapes that are going to end up forcing teenage kids to go somewhere less safe than a retail store to buy them? I mean, I don't like vaping either, and I've never done it, and I wouldn't like my children to do it, but it's a fact of life. It's happened. I just think that it's too hard to stop.
Well, also, the world is sort of moving towards legalisation or decriminalisation of marijuana. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that's the way people are going. You know, you can buy marijuana on any block in Manhattan. In a lot of places in Australia, the police aren't really enforcing it. But at the same time, we're going to criminalise teenagers for sucking on these vapes, which are really popular. So it just smacks as sort of policy on the run. Doesn't seem very well thought through.
Aaron, I think you make an excellent point about marijuana. I mean, I did a little bit of a deep dive today on just what the marijuana laws now are in individual states, but we know that Labor governments, particularly in Queensland and Victoria and South Australia, are all looking at decriminalising marijuana, and it's not going to be long, I don't think, before we have the same sort of marijuana retail shops that you talk about in the States, and of course many Australians find when they go to Thailand.
Look, I think you're right, Steve. I think we're a few years behind the US on this, and so we sort of, as a society, I think we should face up to it. I think we should have an honest debate about drugs, alcohol, and marijuana, and whether and how if we legalise them, how we're going to control them to minimise the harm to young people, to minimise the danger on the roads, because I think a lot of Australians smoke it, and that's the reality, and perhaps we should just deal with that.
Just finally, Aaron, a lot of odd policy around today. It looks like JobSeeker will feature in the budget Tuesday night. We had this leak or announcement really by the PM in Darwin last night that the JobSeeker payment for anyone over the age of 55 will go up to $55 a day. Since when do we split JobSeeker into age-specific areas? I know there has been a slight more dole payment for people over 60, but that seems like a very odd way to get around this whole debate about JobSeeker, doesn't it?
So Steve, you're saying they're going to increase JobSeeker for older people but not younger people?
Correct.
Well, what's the logic behind that? You know, I think if you want to compensate older people, maybe give them tax relief. Maybe you look at the pension. Also, you're at a point where the government's meant to be cutting spending. You know, the government's meant to be trying to cut back on inflation, so they're not meant to be doing inflationary things like pumping out more money for people like that. So it just doesn't sound logical.
And it really seems to me that they're hitting in the hip pocket the people that actually voted for them, Aaron. I mean, if you look at the demographics of where the Labor heart is, it's with younger voters, isn't it?
Of course it is. You know, younger voters overwhelmingly vote left, and as people get older, they get much more conservative. I was talking about this policy to a friend of mine in the Liberal Party, and he said, "Oh, gee, the internal polling must be really bad for them to do this."
Aaron, always a pleasure to catch up, mate. Thank you. Good luck with the budget coverage next week. That's Aaron Patrick for the Australian Financial Review.